Hello, welcome to another episode of the Low-Code Campfire. This is the episode number 189 for April 4, 2025. Our main topic today, the feature request review episode. We'll get into that in a minute. I am Dale Warner, Head of Support for Plantain App. We also have Patrick Anderson, Technical Success Manager for Plantain App. And between us, we'll walk you through what's going on at Plantain App this week. This is an event we do every Friday, 10 a.m. Central Time. It's an opportunity to get together and talk about what's going on at Plantain App and maybe the challenges that you're facing as a low-code developer and the experiences that you're having. All skill levels are welcome, from beginner to expert. And we have lots of experts and beyond here in this meeting. We record all of these and put them on YouTube, so you can get to them at youtube.com/plantainapp. I've put a little shorter agenda for today. We'll do introductions as we do every week. We stop and say hello because we're a friendly group. But then after that, we'll do first call and anything submitted in advance, which, well, nothing was submitted in advance. So we'll do first call, whatever it is you want to talk about. And then we'll jump on into feature requests, things that you'd like to see put into our product. After an hour or so, we go into the afterglow segment. We turn off the recording, raise a virtual adult beverage, and begin to enjoy the weekend a little bit and each other's company. So if you have the opportunity, stick around and join us for that as well. Main thing is do engage, jump in, show and tell, show your screen. We want to just talk about Plantain App however you want to talk about it. You can submit questions and topics in advance, and to do that, you can do it with this QR code, or you can send an email to support@plantainapp.com. Hello all, welcome. Let's admit Mark. I forgot to turn off the waiting room.
Hello, everyone.
Oh, hello.
Hello. Good morning.
Hello.
All right, did anyone come with first call today? Something to talk about. While we're giving that consideration, we also released version 1.27 beta over the Low-Code Cafe 2 days ago. So any comment or feedback on that, we'd be happy to have that, or to talk to you about how to get to participate in the beta. Which now, by the way, we're going to adopt some common terminology. I believe this is RC1, release candidate number 1. We're not going to call them just beta anymore. Hopefully we'll get better at doing releases. Nobody first call?
Dale, Jerry here. I've got a minor first call. I want to spend a lot of time on it. I may have to enter a support ticket on it, but I had put in on the community a few days back an anomaly that I found that's kind of creating some static for me. And that is our action called Repost Data, which basically does a form post over to some other website or wherever you want to take it to. It will not run on the pre-init events and under Bootstrap 5. Yeah, that's it. Bootstrap 3, it works. Bootstrap 5, it does not work on the pre-init or the init events in the form. However, it runs just fine in Bootstrap 5 if it's behind a submit button. I don't know if that qualifies as a ghost story or if it just qualifies as an oversight or a bug in the system, but I'm looking forward to 1.27 fixing that, or a hotfix in 1.26 if possible. I don't know if I articulated myself. Mark tried to help me with it, and he offered some solutions that might have worked, but this is a legacy bit of data processing that we have been doing for years that it suddenly broke just when we were doing our Bootstrap 5 upgrades. Anybody else seen that or heard of it or Anybody report that before? I see where you're going with that, and you really don't have to post any data. You could put anything you wanted in the endpoint URL,
Hmm.
uh, and just under your settings, make sure you set it to Bootstrap 5. Now, what you got to be careful of on this, Dale, is not to get a runaway program, because since that's on the prenet, it's going to execute that code when that page loads, and then it's going to send you off to whatever's in that URL. So I put in under the condition a query string to make, if I want to test it, I'll say something like X equals true or something in the condition that you can control it. That if you don't pass that query string in, the page will just load without firing that repost data. So heads up as you build yourself a test system.
So let me make sure I understand the action. I don't believe I've used this one before. The idea is that this posts data to some other website and
Yeah,
then
think of
uh,
the URL
and,
as like an
and,
endpoint.
and,
Yes,
and
sir.
it
I'm sorry.
transfers your session there.
Yes.
True? Yeah.
In the URL, you would put wherever you want to post the data to. In the post data, you would pass over name value pairs or whatever you want to pass on the receiving end, and that's all there is to it.
So what you're
Perfect.
saying is that this doesn't work in um, Bootstrap 5. It doesn't do anything on.
Oh no, it'll throw some gibberish on the screen.
Ah, okay. Okay. So this is
I
only
think
going
you're good. But I
to
think the
work.
only other thing you'd want to do is in your settings, make sure you're at Bootstrap 5, and
Okay.
you are.
All right. So, um, yeah. So if we go here now, and this is actually under that. I'm not seeing anything, but it's not.
Well, did you pass in test equals true?
I didn't. Um,
And did it redirect?
no. Um, so I didn't. I'm not able to reproduce this one real quickly, but I fully believe you that
No.
that this is an issue for Bootstrap 5, and I would say should be reported as a ticket. If you're
No
seeing
worries.
if you're seeing it working on Bootstrap 3, not working on Bootstrap 5, and I can fully anticipate that. Um, yeah, the
I'm
design.
curious on yours, and 100% agree, and that's what we'll do. We won't waste good quality television time on this project, but I notice yours isn't redirecting at all. You
Right.
should be heading over to google.com when that thing fires, and it's not.
And just for fun, let's put a button on here.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you to do. Chunk a button in there and put that action behind that button and see what happens.
Import the same thing, except that we won't have any condition. It only happens if we punch the button.
Precisely. Now, don't pass in your test equals true. So you just come to the page. Otherwise, it would try to fire that on the prenet.
And the form isn't loading at all, though, so that's interesting.
Yeah, maybe take that out. You're getting a little bit different
Of an impact.
yeah, so your symptoms are a little different.
So yeah, I'm getting something completely different.
Okay, yeah.
I'm gonna do a empty cache hard reload, see if that gives us any difference. But if you'll enter a ticket, I will be happy to poke at it a
Sure.
little and to see if
No worries.
see if I can find the pattern and that, or if that aligns with what you're seeing, and then we'll do that. So you talked a little bit with Mark about this, and perhaps he was.
I think
Did you find
Mark's
a workaround?
well, no, not really. Mark was his intention was to like let's just try and make it automatically fire the submit button and use the section of the form that does work versus trying to catch it on the pre-init, and that doesn't work for me at all. Just the business logic doesn't work for me to do it that way. So, um, but what I did do and fix was I just converted that page back to Bootstrap 3 or the form back to Bootstrap 3. It's not as clean looking as maybe I would hope for it to be with our new Bootstrap 5 theme and thinking, but it's functioning and the client is doesn't know the difference. So that makes
Okay.
for me to have a happy Friday.
Yeah, I'm glad that was the main thing that you were able to get the application working again. So glad that was an option. But yeah, so it sounds like something that we need to give some attention to. There's a few things in Bootstrap 5, and I think they'll come up again as our conversation goes forward, that things that were done in Bootstrap 3 were not brought forward into Bootstrap 5. And in other areas
So
as well, so getting parity is
okay.
part of this effort.
Thank you, Dale. To close this out, the repost data actions, it's been around for a really long time, and its intent is to take form data, possibly, or any data for that matter, format it any way you really want to, but and pass it to another website. And we have a client that is still programming in some foreign language called Cold Fusion. Some of you guys will be old enough to remember that. I certainly do. And they're not clever enough to parse JSON, or they're not clever enough to call my API. And unfortunately, it's just one of those things where I'm integrated with a really legacy system that's not my baby to control. So until they upgrade and get better, I don't really have a better way to pass data to them. So anyway, that's my story. I'm sticking to it, and I'll do a formal ticket, and let's go talk about something way more interesting than Cold Fusion and Repost Data.
Just real quick, for what it's worth, I was able to reproduce it. So
Thank you.
yeah.
I was trying to do it on a form that already existed, and maybe I was already having problems with that form. So glad you were able to do it. I'll follow up with you.
Thank you, Patrick.
When I asked the first question about first call, Mark, briefly, you raised your hand. I don't want to call you out, but do you want to play?
I'll play.
Okay, what do you got?
I would like to know if it's possible to pass a collection of record data out of a workflow. Put this in context. I know you can create an action which will run a SQL, which will return one record, and you can put the entire contents of that record into one token. And then you can parse the pieces out with the token name, colon, and the name of the column that you want. What I want to do is create a workflow that will create that single token that has all of the fields of that record contained within. And then I want to use that token elsewhere in my form. So can you pass that collection token outside of a workflow and consume it elsewhere?
And I think the basic answer is no. I always ask Patrick to correct me when I'm wrong, but when you do an input token to a workflow, whatever it is, you have the choice of what kind of primitive that is. But and the default is text. The outputs are always text. I believe they're actually large text, a text of unlimited length, virtually unlimited length, but the token and all of its variants won't do it, won't pass through it. It's not like a my token. And yet you can get that objective, you just can't get there as simply as you'd like. If you output, the easiest way that I've found to do it is to output JSON and then from your SQL query, and then that JSON string is easily parsed in your next query. It's not as straightforward as what you'd like. And I saw Ben's hand go up and down, so maybe I mentioned where he was already going. But if you have anybody has a better answer on how to transfer that, be great to hear. But whether it's one record or 10 records, you can, if you output it as JSON, then it's very consumable. For example, you can just turn it into with one statement on the caller, you can create list from JSON and then iterate it.
Sure, that's fine. This was just a little theory test on my part. I wanted to know if I could do that. I actually could just put the SQL on the destination form that just returns one record, and that's just one action instead of several. Mm-hmm. So I was just wanting to know if that was possible. I thought maybe, trying to make workflows so I could reuse them, but so yeah. I'm satisfied with the answer.
Well, good. I appreciate that. There's always ways to do things, but unfortunately, the outputs of workflow are text. So there we go.
Very good. Thank you.
All right. Last first call. 3, 2. All right. So I've already mentioned we are in version 127 beta, which we're also calling release candidate 1, trying to call, we'll number them much like the platform numbers them as well, so that as we go through testing, if we decide that we'll keep advancing until we land on a release candidate that is acceptable, and then we'll call that the final version. So a little terminology change. But there's a bigger change afoot, and I wanted to spend a little time going over it and making sure that, this is a draft policy that we're doing, but it's intended to help us move faster with these, we'll be putting them through our Kanban process, but the idea is that the things that you've been waiting for, that we'll get to them faster. And that's the reason we're making changes. So the structure that we have, the idea that we have in a moment, and if there's any feedback, always love to hear it, is that this next release that the 127, when it completes, the RC is accepted and we're through the beta process, that we'll call this version 127 and stable. We might work with the terminology a little bit. I won't guarantee that the words won't change, but the idea is the same, that this is just going to be, anybody who upgrades to 127, that's what you're going to get. The only hotfixes that we're going to release to it are things that are critical security related, things that are going to benefit all clients. And then we're going to immediately go to version 128 as well, and we're going to call that latest. And latest will be the same as 127, except that any hotfixes that are going to come there. So this gives you the opportunity to, if you value stability, you'll stay on 127. If you value getting things as fast as you possibly can, then they're going to be available to you on 128. And so you can choose somebody who's running a production environment and does not want to see any instability. You would go with a stable. If you have tolerance or you're doing a development environment and it works better for you to get something sooner than later, then the latest would be the version for you. Have I either lost anybody or drawn any questions yet?
If you were to go to latest, does that mean that you have all the hot fixes all the time?
Nope, you still get to pick. So let's scroll down to that section. The latest, you'll still have the experience that we've provided in the past, where the hotfixes are listed on the hotfixes tab. You decide what you install, but the difference is that one of the challenges for us is to test to fully test things that we're releasing, and so by the stable release will be tested as a whole and released, and then by making as few changes as possible to it, that gives it that's where stability derives from. When you're on the latest version, and as we release hotfixes, what we do, we test every hotfix that we introduce, and but we don't test the product as a whole to say, yes, we've introduced this hotfix, and every other feature has been tested to work with this as well. It's too big a job to do at the every hotfix level. So we introduce it, we've tested it, we don't think there's any problems, but because it's a change, it introduces a certain amount of uncertainty. So you get access to things faster, but the drawbacks are you might run into some instability because we haven't tested everything we can. That was more than you asked. Yes, you have control of the hotfixes.
And once you have the stable release, if a security patch or something is posted to that, will the next release, the latest release also automatically get that, or will that, so you're on an even playing field?
Yes, if we decide to, let's cover that. If we decide that something is important enough to patch the stable, first of all, in most cases, you'll get to decide whether or not to even apply that in your stable environment, right? It'll still come out as a hotfix. You still get to click and decide to install it. But then, yes, if we fix 127, excuse me, if we fix the stable, it'll go into the latest, and it'll also get into the future releases as well.
I think the only thing I hear that a potential for that is if I'm on 128 and you put a patch into 127, that now if I have a problem with 128, you don't know if I have that patch with a 127 as a starting point. So
making sure I understand. You're on 128. We fix something in 127. We will also release that as a hotfix in 128, but it's up to you to decide to install it. And so, yes, we don't know if you've installed it. We'll know that you have it available to you. Did I catch that right?
yeah, no, it's a really fine point of just like making sure that, and it's more of a support question, I guess. If I decided not to, and you spend a bunch of time looking at a 128 problem, then find out, oh, you never applied that hotfix from 127. That it's not an equal. You can't just say, okay, you're on 127, or 128. You're on 127 at this hotfix level.
Right.
Was your starting
point. And this is much the same problem that we face now, that when we release hotfixes, and they're at your discretion if you don't install them. I mean, and think about those of you who've been with us for a long time. There's been certain things that we've released that we say you must install X before you install Y, or you'll break things. That's the same kind of circumstance that you could find yourself in its stable. I don't think it's any worse than what we already have. It's just, as you point out, it's not a guarantee that because you're on 128, you have everything that's been released for 127.
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea because it's a smaller exposure than what the current way we're doing it.
So that would become an alternating, a regular pattern that the next release would be 129 would end up then being a stable release with everything from, at that point, it's a complete roll up. Everything from 127, everything from 128, all tested together is going to become our next 129 and stable. And so if you value stability, you would get you would stay on those stable releases. If you're waiting for the latest and greatest as soon as you can get it, then the next one would be your spot. I have not, aside from conceptually, I don't know. I mean, there's an ongoing. This was presented as part of a coordination between management and development and support, and so development might, for however they're going to organize themselves, they will be dedicating people to that makes it available to dedicate people to working on those things that, and now we're going to get into feature requests in a little bit. We've said these things are important, they're fixable, they're going to impact our clients. Let's get after them sooner. Those will become the focus of the latest version, and will help prioritize those things, and then hopefully see more things move into the product because they're organized in this way. That's our goal. Conceptually, did anybody find it confusing, or could be explained or use better words even? Or is it easy to understand as it is? I know it's new, so if you have feedback for us as you're thinking about it, let us know. We want to provide what it is that you value most, stability or latest. And of course, multiple environments, you can make different choices. So your production can be one and development can be another, and get both. All right. So that's the groundwork. If we can, let's move on talking about feature requests. I warned you about this last week that I was going to take up the topic, and I know Mark took me seriously on it, so we can go with that. But the idea is, let's on the things that it makes, help me understand what things should be prioritized from your perspective, and the more I'd love to focus on things that are either key to a few people or helpful to a lot of people, or let it help us work on the right things. If we make a change on something that nobody cares about, but we can yeah, we call it a fixed bug, but if nobody cares, not as good as finding something that is really going to help you. I'll just start out by saying, the answer, of course, isn't going to be always going to be yes. There are some things that, for example, I know behind the scenes, we are working on Forms 2.0, and that's very important. So replacement to action form or an eventual replacement to action form is what we're calling Forms 2.0. Part of that is improving using the right libraries underneath so that we pass penetration tests and things like that. So it's very important that we get to Forms 2.0. Some things that you might want to see that would impact action form will probably just never happen in action form. Not to say action form is development is stopped, but just some bigger things, just the answer can't be yes because we're going to put our effort into doing it in the newer product instead of the older product. So not all answers will be yes, but we'd like to have you like to do as much as we can. All right. So Mark, I think you brought forward an item of consensus. Are there items that you think might be of consensus? Sort by vote. Let's do that. Anything you want to talk about?
Well, Dale, that second one in your current list has a lot of votes, and it's got my face on it. That actually, I understand your explanation about it. Probably not going to be too much development, if any at all, on the current action form. But I would like to see on anything that is action form related that you would take these suggestions, these feature requests, and work it into the new design. I accept that it can't be done now, but I sure would hope that that would be considered for the new product.
And I think we've talked about this before. I know we have, but your scenario is that you might have many dozens of fields on your form and you're trying to find something.
Yeah.
And
in the manage mode, yeah.
Yeah. And that makes sense. You may be among our highest on the high percentile number of fields used. A lot of times when we do testing or the forms that we design, maybe they have smaller numbers, and so trying to find you may be seeing a problem. The people that use our product to the extreme find those things better. From my perspective, I often find things. I'm babbling. Things that work well with 100 records work differently with 100,000 records and things like that. So when you push us, that's where these efficiencies pop out. So I get your point. Anyway, that's.
Well, there's at least 11 people who agree.
Yeah, I'm agreeing with you. So just for what it's worth, that's feature request. Feature request 21, how to find a particular field in a busy form design screen that would be useful to incorporate into either forms or Forms 2.0. Doing that to make notes, okay?
So I think the word is resubmitted a feature request a couple of days ago that is the same line of thinking, but it's actually in a list of actions in an action stack. It comes down to being able to flag or tag a particular action or a particular type of action, but from my experience, it would be a particular action, not a type.
right, that was feature request 191, add the ability for a developer to flag or tag actions. I like this. So the idea is, well, the suggestion is a color change or an added icon. In our new UI, I know we have the ability to, so in our new UI, execute actions. When you put an action in something, have this on-off switch. So this disable action thing that
Oh, good.
that hides that, or rather turns it off, and you get a different visual. And so I'm thinking that that's a similar kind of a flag that doesn't impact the activity, just visually changes it, color or whatever would be a nice.
Yeah, that's exactly what I would like to see.
Ben,
I'm
are you,
happy to see that disable button too.
Ben, are you adding?
Yeah,
to this?
I was just gonna say an idea would be like where that triple dot is, similar to like if anyone has used Microsoft Outlook, you can right click on an email in your inbox and they're basically they're called flags and they give you like all the different flag colors. If we could have something like that so that on here you would see flags which would then open up another sub menu and you would see all the different color flags and you just pick the color you want because then any development environment can pick whatever their process is. So they may say like orange is specifically for things that we need to look at, or purple are things that need to be approved, or something like that, where you can design what the colors mean for your organization, and then whatever that color is, that bar turns that color.
I absolutely love that idea because it probably takes just as much effort to put in something binary that an on-off switch like this is, as it does to put in a flag that you get to have some variation. So if we had 8 or 12 or however many flags, you would get just as much effort out of as much. You get more value out of about the same amount of development effort. So from a that was particular. I'm sorry, I jumped back to the previous one. And then I'm just reading on down that here we are flagging and tagging, but the comment is also to make a field that you can type into just a little bit of documentation or explanation.
Tried to sneak that in, Dale.
Yep. Yeah. You and then you wandered off into forms, and so you.
Well, I spend a lot of time in development, as you might guess.
Yep.
These kinds of things, they start to wear on you. Like you revisit something that you think, oh yeah, I remember. I was trying to remember that this required a little bit extra attention because it has this other condition I have to be aware of, and all those little things you're trying to keep in your current memory. It makes sense to me that some of these things just need to have a field that we as developer can type some notes into there.
So this is
Especially if we're
not
not
what,
the one always working on it. If we have someone helping us, that would be really helpful.
so this is not the one that you asked about, but I want to make sure you know that it's here, that there is a notes action. that you can put as much content as you want into. And so if you want to document an action, you could put a notes before or after it. And this is a no-op action. It will be ignored in terms of execution, but it will, you can at least put some words with your stuff. So that was an easy solution that we did a long time ago. And so let's start there. Were you aware of that? Would this help your needs?
I was at one time aware of that, and I'm happy to be reminded about that. It looks like that is on an action, or like it's in the action stack.
It is.
Okay, well, that would be helpful. It then becomes, it's independent of the action.
It
So
is.
that's more like of a note about what's going on in this action stack, more so than the note about a particular action. So it's a finer point.
I'm pointing it out because it's what's available today, not
Sure.
because it completely answers the question that you have. But if you want to document an action, you could, for example, put notes right above it, and then you would at least have, I mean, you can use it to document the stack. You could use it to document a particular action. It's up to you how to use it. But you being able to, have a HTML formatted, nice internal documentation that's available to you. The
Okay, so
request
I
that
want
you
to be
have,
quick to say that's great and I like it, but it doesn't travel with the action. If I move the
Right.
action around, then it becomes disjointed. So it's a finer point, and I'm not trying to complain because I like being reminded that it's there. That's good.
yeah. Yep, I offer that only in the spirit of what's
Thank you.
available today, and then
That's that way.
to your point, being able to add content. I know we have description, but this kind of has this is pretty short and has some pretty specific use when you're in a workflow, in that it shows up on the box. And if you want to say 100 words about what the box does, then having another line to be able to fill that in. I know there's as the product committee looks at these things and tries to figure out, there's always a little bit of tension between what I'm trying to say is real estate, right? That if you're not using that thing and it's taking up space, I mean, we've tried to go for a pretty minimalistic look on each action. So for somebody who's not using it and it's taking up a line that you have to scroll through or whatever, so trying to figure out where to put that would be.
I appreciate you giving that attention. It can be collapsed by default.
So one of the things that we do, like right now with conditions, is when you put in a condition, whatever it is, that when we reopen that the condition shows up. Before, the condition line wasn't showing, so we could do something. I mean, just brainstorming. We could do something similar. For example, add notes in the ... area, and then it would be aside. It wouldn't be visible until you actually start using it. So that's just throwing it out there as a possibility. But good, thank you for making the suggestion.
Thank you. Thank you. Remember that the suggestion is for applying to fields as well. So, a note on a field, that kind of thing.
Yes, and that because of how pervasive that is, I suspect that's one of those things that might be looked at version 2.0. But let's get that on the list. Absolutely,
That would be awesome.
Is there any others you want to call attention to? Anyone?
Speak up, Ben.
I have a few, of course, self-serving, but
Well, nothing wrong with that. Self-serving you self-serves the community.
I just have I just went through the list of the ones that I've put in, and I do have six that just basically I would like to like call attention to. Um, so the first one is feature 112. I have them by number, if that helps.
We'll find it. Specified data type in SQL queries.
Yeah, so this one was basically because what I've noticed is that when you're binding tokens to SQL queries, they're always coming in as a varchar of whatever the length of the original data that went in is. So for example, if the data coming in was, you know, my field, then you're going to get a varchar 7. Now, let's say inside the SQL statement, you want to modify that parameter and say my space field. You can't do it. It's going to truncate the data because it forcibly came in as the size of the original data. You can't make it any bigger. And then also becomes the issue of like numbers are coming in as strings and things like that, or true false are coming in as true false text as opposed to bit, a binary. So then you have to convert them in your SQL. And it would be nice if we had the option to say, whatever the data is coming in, this is the data type that I want the system to convert it to when it comes in to the actual SQL statement. So declare it as this data type as opposed to the default, which is varchar, whatever size the
Mhm.
original text was.
So thinking about, I mean, there's a couple of things there, and I just want to poke it and ask a question about one of them.
Mhm.
Would there, if we're now defining text as coming in as the length that it actually is, I understand what you're saying. Would we incur any penalty if we just declared them as varchar max? Would it be?
For the varchars, I wouldn't think so. I mean, it's going to take a smidgen more in memory, but these scripts are finite in their existence, so I don't really think doing a varchar max would be a problem. It would definitely address the situation that it's happening right now, uh, but it won't address the other items, like for like example, like I said, Boolean, a bit value. You're sending in true false, that's coming in as text. And when you're in the script, you then have to say, convert the true
Yes.
false text into 1-0.
And I
Things
was
like
I was
that.
really trying to break the problem down into bite-sized pieces, right? So uh, it occurs to me that um, we could just address the first piece of that, defining it in varchar max instead of figuring out what its length is and defining it as varchar 7.
Mhm.
And so I was trying to get, I mean, our developers will have opinions about whether or not um, that that's technically a problem. But I'm asking from your perspective, if we just arbitrarily started defining all those as varchar max, would that would be backwards compatible with anything that you've ever done? And
Oh yeah, I mean you're making the original variable that's being declared larger. So in a situation where if you want to modify said variable and you want to make its value larger than its original size, it will address that. Right now, you can't. If you try to make that value larger than its original size, you crash.
Right. So I was just, yeah. So that sounds very contained to me as one possible suggestion. Maybe not something that impacts everybody, but it wouldn't be hard to do. The bigger one would have this, being able to do types makes sense to me. Is now we just have on the front end more. We got to collect more information. What types do you want? And then get those injected into the SQL, however that happens. So it makes sense. It's just a bigger effort. And wondering if it made any sense to deliver any piece of that earlier. Forward.
So if anyone want to give a thumb up that hasn't already, feel free. The other one I had was number 141.
All right, give me just a second more on
Yeah, sure.
112. So there's lots and lots of SQL queries that already exist that have bind tokens, and so obviously if we did that, then all those would default to something compatible. Blank would mean the existing behavior. So that's
Yeah, I mean, the way I envision it in my head was like this image where it says bind tokens, where you have the parameter name and then the value, like right next to value, another one, which is a drop down that says data type. And one of them could be default, and you could leave that as existing behavior, even if it's just, defining it as varchar of the size of the original data coming in. So that way, everyone, a new version of the action would have the same exact behavior as it always has. But it will give you the option to then override that and say, no, I want this to be a varchar max, or I want this to be a date, or I want this to be a Boolean. And then if you give it a value, then at the time that the system executes the SQL statement, because what it's basically doing is taking all of these binds and turning them into declarative statements at the very beginning of the script. It's just forcibly injecting it. Just inject it with the data type that you've specified.
Yep. Do you see any need for, like when you're defining varchars, do they need the ability to specify a length, or would those?
I mean, me personally, I wouldn't think so. I would say, I mean, default be the way it works right now, or one of the options would just be varchar max. Like, I wouldn't see the true necessity of saying this needs to be specifically a varchar 2, for example.
Because this question is whether we collect one more piece of information or two more.
Yeah, I think to make it simple, initially just having a drop down, and even if there's only one varchar option, which is max, so either you get the original behavior, which is varchar whatever size originally, was created, or varchar max is still going to give us more options than we've had before. And it'll be more simplistic because it's just simply one additional piece of data. I don't think at this point in time, I don't think that it would really be necessary to go into the weeds of saying, well, now varchar, but then how big of a varchar do we need?
Great. Thanks. That's it for 112. What was the next one you wanted to talk about?
141. And this is because of a conversation that we had, I believe it was last week or the week before. But to see the history cleanup on several different areas, because it's growing now. It's not just the automation scheduler. Now we also have to contend with the API audit table, things of that nature, along with what we've seen with the actual physical log files in the folder structure. It would be nice if we had a built-in history cleanup for those types of areas and any future areas that may, come, because like I know the API audit didn't exist until several versions ago. And, when new tables come in like that have that type of auditing, it would be nice if we had the ability to set up rules around how much of that we want to save.
So I think not only for the convenience, what you're talking about, but also for other reasons having to do with some of the new offerings that we're planning to make, starter plan, that this makes a lot of sense, trying to keep sites in from getting overrun with data that needs to be cleaned up and making sure you have the ability to do it. So I would give a thumbs up to whoops, that's taken away. I already, but automation, self cleanup of history, that number 141, I absolutely agree with. Anyone else have a, if you have an agree, if you agree, please click and get into that one. All right, what else?
172. This is a me thing. I don't know if anyone else has ever hit this issue, but when creating that auto login link, we don't really have good control on where the user is sent to after login. And I would love something so simple as just to say, give us a text box where we just explicitly give the path to where we want the user to go. And the main reason for this is because when you log in, when you go to a DNN page and you have to log in to access that page, one of the things that DNN natively does is it throws I believe it's a return, I forget what the actual, return URL. It throws a parameter on the URL called return URL, and then it fills it with whatever the original page was you were trying to go to. So if we could explicitly say on the auto login link, go to the following page, we could just say use, bracket, query string, colon, return URL, bracket. So once they log in, we're just saying use the return URL that DNN supplied us because that was the page they were trying to go to. But we can't do that right now. We can only pick a particular page to go to regardless of anything else. So if they were trying to get to page Z, once they log in, they're going to go right to the home page or whatever page you have it set to.
Yep.
And that's it. We can't dynamically say, no, go to the page that they were initially trying to go to.
Yes, this makes sense to me, and I'm pretty sure the way that we store it, we could store that query string as part of it, so when the redirect link was activated, it could just grab it and go. So I think it's very doable. So that's 172.
Sorry, I feel like I'm monopolizing because I have a laundry list. 186 is the next one. This bit me recently, but I don't know how feasible this is because it seems to be a Bootstrap 5 situation. But, in our old Bootstrap 3, we were able to, or it's the default behavior was that things snap to the left unless you clicked on preserve layout. I know Bogdan had said that this is a side effect of using the Bootstrap 5 grid options, the way the layouts are. I don't know if anything can be done, but if it can be looked at, it would just be nice because like right now, the forms that previously used to snap to the left and would readjust themselves based off of a drop-down selection, and it would look nice and clean because everything was always aligned to the left. Now they're all over the form with wide white space gaps in between controls, and it doesn't really look nice. So just from the perspective of, UI.
Makes sense.
193. This was another recent one that bit me. Would love to have the ability to update the dynamic fields container after the page loads. Basically force it to refresh and repopulate itself with whatever actions, are put in.
So this may be one of those that falls into the Forms 2.0 category, but regardless, it's worth putting into the mix. It's for those that are using dynamic fields, I know that would be very useful. I just don't know how much. I think this would be the kind of effort that would be very hard to do in action form today.
Well, as long as it's
On the
on the
list.
radar.
Yep.
And 194, last one. And this is one that I've actually wanted for a long time. And I know the response that I've gotten in the past was, well, you have workflows, but that doesn't really fully address the need or want. I put a very, very simplistic example there, but for example, you have a form, submit and cancel. The cancel button, let's say, does a couple of things and then closes that form out, whereas the submit button will save some data and then do the same thing that the cancel close button does. It would be nice if we could just have the submit button say, do all your actions, and then call the action stack by ID number that's in the cancel button. And that way, for maintenance purposes, whatever logic you put in that cancel button doesn't have to be recreated in the submit and maintained in 2 or multiple different spots. If it's the same logic, you would just fix it in one area, and then all of the other areas that call it, just simply call it. They just add those action stacks by ID number into its current action stack as it's pulling the data out to execute them.
Yeah, without commenting on whether, I understand you already mentioned that workflow is probably the direction that you would get as a if that came in as a question on the help desk, I would probably send you towards workflow. Let's put it that way.
The
Without
only
commenting,
problem with that idea, sorry, not to cut you off, I'm just saying, is that the workflow idea doesn't always function, at least not cleanly, when let's say your actions need to access data that's in context of that page at that moment.
mm-hmm.
That's
So you can't
where the workflow becomes a little quirky to use.
Patrick, you were jumping in.
I was going to say that, and you can't use a front-facing action in a workflow. So I kind of get what you're saying, Ben, is that you want that just to have the whole be able to run some actions and then some specific actions for a button and then pass and then get all the actions from the other button to happen. It makes sense.
Yeah, especially
one of the things you could not do with a workflow is anything that's front end on that page.
right. What you were just saying, Patrick, about the front end, like toast windows.
Yeah, like you couldn't do a
Can't-
toast message, right? Yeah.
Right. And that's one thing, like, if that was part of that action stack that you wanted to reutilize, you can't turn that into a workflow because toasts aren't available on workflows.
So let me ask a possible alternative and see if it would work. Are you looking for a subroutine kind of functionality where it's call and come back? Or if we had a run this button action, transfer control to this button, so you run the save and then it transfers control to the cancel, where the cancel then executes.
I think saying run this other button is probably, there's 2 comments to that. One, I think it's probably more complicated than what I'm proposing. And number two, it limits you to also say that it will run every action that that button has. You no longer have the ability to granularize your request on the actions. What I'm envisioning is basically a very simple, kind of similar to the create update tokens, where it's very a simple thing. You only have literally one box that you fill in, and the only thing it's asking for is the ID number of the action that you want to inject into this action stack. It just copies it and runs it. That's it.
So I get. So now let's go on to that one for a second. One of the areas that we have that we're trying to avoid is to do anything by integers. That doesn't really affect too much what you're talking about, because we could identify the execute action by a global ID, but calling things by an integer is kind of it causes other problems when we're trying to get to the point where we can move between environments of development to production kind of scenario, because the integer numbers shift. But yes, we could identify it some other way, so it's possible. Is it good for the language standpoint? I understand what you're trying to avoid and lower the maintenance, but now you're in a spot where a chunk of code that lives someplace else that isn't obviously in, it's being called as a subroutine from somewhere that you can't see, and so that has its own maintainability things, I think.
Well, then, okay, on that idea, you just made me think of something different. And this is a little bit different, but I think would garner basically the same outcome. How about an action similar to like execute actions, where you, let's say at the time of page load, you would predefine these are a bunch of actions that I want to do, and it saves it with some unique GUID or something to that effect. And then anywhere in the form, there's another action saying run previously stored action stack with whatever the identifier is, however you guys want to set that up. And at the time of load, it's throwing that action stack into context and saying, this is a whole series of actions. It's associated with this unique ID number. Later on, whenever you call it, that's the action stack that gets inserted and executed. So at that point, we're not calling specifically by ID, but it's giving you that same idea of creating a stack of actions that is kind of universal for what that form, and gives you one location to manage it, as opposed to having it in multiple locations. And then you could just call it in the submit and call it in the cancel button type of idea.
So I think you've identified an area that is a problem, and let me tell you this much. We'll bring it to the product committee and try to find a construct or suggest some brainstorm around how can we make low coding in this area easier, because I think there's solutions, but I think dealing with it, I think we need to think about what's best for the product to make that happen. It is a problem. Okay, since we're already at 70 minutes, I'm gonna call it here. Anything else that you want to bring to my attention? I have to do prioritization of things, make suggestions, and bring them in front of the product committee so that we can make decisions on what gets worked on in our new latest version. And so if you want to email to support@plantandapp.com anything that we didn't talk about today, happy to put it into the mix. With that, thanks for spending your hour with us and your time and your talents. Appreciate working with you week by week. If you have a minute, hang around for Afterglow. We'll talk a little bit after we turn off the recording. Thanks, everyone, and we will see you again next week.